Thanks again, and sorry again for the technology. And so this paper, I'm going to talk about something that has been proposed and implemented for quite a while in a lot of blockchain systems, which I call the optimistic blockchain mechanisms. So the idea is so-called. This is the topic of the talk. Is so-called optimistic designs in blockchain systems. And this is something I wouldn't say quite new now, because it's been implemented for many years in many blockchain systems. Kind of the most common example is so-called optimistic rollups in the Ethereum ecosystem. So the so-called optimistic design is built on so-called optimistic principle, or sometimes as compared to correction by construction designs. It means that we assume that the system, we know that blockchain, right, contains a lot of, we try to remove trust. So there are certain parts that presumably we rely on trusted behaviors. And we just basically, the optimistic design just assumes that, okay, all participants will behave well, so they are all trustworthy, okay, until they are being caught that being not trustworthy. And then and usually it's implemented by the so-called stake and slash mechanism. So the participants who are in those blockchain systems, they put down some deposits at stake, and now we just assume that they will always behave in the way that the system expect them to behave. And if they are ever caught not behaving, then their stakes, the deposits they put down there, will be confiscated. And that's what they call the slash mechanism. So the stake and slash mechanism comes together with this optimistic designs. So far, this is kind of maybe a little bit abstract. I'll give you more examples of what do we exactly mean by optimistic designs. So they are so designed so that participants can be assumed. I mean, the designing principle is that we assume that they will behave well, because otherwise they will face penalties that goes against their rational incentives. The fact that people have put down some collaterals makes some good deterrents to bad behaviors. So these are the design principles, and it's widely adopted. And it starts off many years ago, goes back to now almost like 8 years ago. Well, the first time I hear about them was like 8 years ago when Ethereum was talking about its scaling solutions. At the time, people were talking about the plasma. And so actually the genesis of this paper actually starts off around that time. When I was like listening to people telling me about how the plasma project is going to work, I began to realize there may be some incentive issues in that. So at the time I write a one-page memo, but I never thought it was like big enough to make into a full paper, until I see that just this optimistic design has just been adopted so widely, and people seem not to be talking about it enough. And I feel like I feel there's a need to actually write it out and make the message clear to the community. So as I mentioned, that this is adopted in the so-called layer 2 solutions, optimistic rollups, including the leading examples, so-called Arbitrum, Optimism, and also Coinbase a couple of years ago. I think was 2023 maybe, they launched this base. And so these are all optimistic rollups. So the idea of an optimistic rollup is an Ethereum scaling solution. The idea is that, well, there are so many transactions on Ethereum, and Ethereum has limited capacity, so we cannot include all the transactions. So just like when the highway is congested, what we do, we divert some traffic off the highway and go to those country roads, right? So then maybe periodically they will be redirected back to the highway. So that's how we divert the traffic and make things work. Similar in Ethereum scaling solution, right? If the layer 1 Ethereum is not able to handle enough transactions, so let's just divert some transactions off the main layer 1 chain, and so that they will be operating on those so-called L2, layer 2 chains. And periodically, the transaction, whatever has happened, is going to be synced back to the Ethereum layer 1. That's how the rollup idea is about. But then the question is, like, whoever is passing the information on the L2 back onto L1, how can we ensure that the information transferred they are transferred correctly, whether they are like manipulating transactions or they are omitting censoring certain transactions, right? So we need the process for information on L2 to L1 to be conducted right. So the optimistic rollup, the idea is that whoever is doing this job, they'll put down some collateral in the first place. Okay, and then we just assume that they always honestly pass information happening on the L2 back onto L1. And if they are ever caught of not doing this job correctly, then whatever they put down as collateral in the first place will be slashed. And hopefully that creates enough deterrence so that they will behave honestly. All right, so hopefully this gives a more concrete example to illustrate what I mean by optimistic designs in the first place. But this kind of principle, it's been adopted in those rollups. All these L2 rollups actually are functioning, are thriving, but also it's actually applied in other setups as well. Because actually, if you think about Ethereum's proof of stake itself, is actually also implementing those stake and slash mechanism. And there's a lot of like optimistic cross-chain bridges, like Nomad Connects, they also adopt this principle. Okay. So as I have alluded to before, that this is a widely adopted method. But it remains a theoretical question, are these optimist design actually can secure the system among rational and self-interest parties? Is the current design really incentive compatible? Right? So, and as you probably can imagine that like the reason I'm standing here giving the talk is that I'm not going to point out that there seems to be some issues with incentive compatibility there. Okay, and so again, I'm going to put up a very simple model, again, embarrassingly simple model, but I want to illustrate, just formalize this argument. So hopefully by the end of the talk, we'll see that what is actually missing in those optimist designs. Okay, so skip the related literature. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide some institutional details. I've already given some institutional details about L2s and just give you a little bit more so that you can appreciate the importance of this topic further. And then I'm going to I only have time to go over the simplest model, but that illustrates all the ideas. And then I'm going to consider some model extensions to just build on the simplest model. But if we don't have time, I'm happy to skip this part. And if we have time, we'll also I will try to make some connections about what the model implications has to do with what is actually going on in practice. So, all right, so let's jump into it. And
sorry.
Yes.
I think I can add to your list of examples of where this sort of thing is used.
Yeah.
When you put a deposit on a flat, or just the legal system that you're innocent until proven guilty, and then if you get convicted of a crime, I think it's quite similar principle is deployed in a lot of places.
Yeah.
Works pretty well. So.
Yeah, so the design, I think a lot of the blockchain design certainly borrows from insight that we learned from other systems, right? But I think what is important to know that is like we typically tend to think about blockchain is to like basically because of Bitcoin, because Nakamoto consensus, right? We try to think about blockchain is trying to rely on incentives and to create a trust minimized system. Right. So that usually people equate that with a fully incentive compatible system. And I want to just point out that there is a fine difference between these two. And this is going to be the gist of the talk. Yeah. Not saying that they necessarily will fail in reality, and because a lot of them actually are doing. But I will also give you reasons why a lot of these designs seems to be actually working now. Okay. So just a background. So as I said, that around the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, this is the time when we see the transaction fee. This is on Bitcoin, but similar on Ethereum. The next slide. This is when like CryptoKitty came out, and Ethereum's transaction fee just shoot to the roof. And this is the time when people begin to be realizing, okay, Ethereum just does not have enough capacity to process all transactions. So it's important to consider those scaling solutions. And that's why when Plasma came out, and that's how I kind of conceived the core idea of this paper back then, but the paper was written a little bit later. Right? So I think I'm going to skip this because L2 scaling solutions, really as I just mentioned, that is trying to process transactions off the main chain and to keep but in order to keep the L1 and L2 in sync, we need to ensure whoever is doing that does a good job. And the way that an optimistic solution is just takes by the stake and slash mechanism. So this is the Plasma in the early attempt, and that was dated 2017. And then the Arbitrum, that was in 2018. That was a paper published on Usenix, is one of the leading conference in computer security, and the authors I think this author, and yeah, these 3 authors of that paper, they went on, they actually quit academia, right? So to fit the theme of this conference, they quit academia and they start up they created a startup called Off-Chain Labs, and basically they create the first optimistic rollup, and which is called Arbitrum, okay? And if we look at the documentation, so this is the screenshot of the doc of this Arbitrum. The fonts are really small, you probably cannot see it. So that's why I pick one of them, I highlight the important paragraph there, right? Then what it says is, Arbitrum is optimistic. Arbitrum advances the state of chain by letting any party post on L1, layer 2, a rollup block that party claims is correct, and then giving everyone else a chance to challenge that claim. Okay, and if anyone is successful in challenging, saying, okay, when the block that you actually carry over from L2 to L1 is not correct, whatever deposits you put down there is going to be confiscated or slashed. So this is really the quintessential example of an optimistic rollup. Actually, a lot of other projects kind of follow this basic design principles. And just to give you more context that this L2 is important, this is still quite a bit outdated data, but because the stuff is written some time ago. And you can see this is the transaction count on Ethereum versus Arbitrum. And you can see over time, the transaction count on Arbitrum is actually catching up with the Ethereum mainnet. I think if I project the time periods a little bit further, this amount is actually going to go even higher. Okay, and then there's other competitors to Arbitrum like the Optimism. It's also having the similar trend. And then latest entry at the time was the Coinbase Base. And Base is actually now having much higher transaction volume. So in total, the L2s actually have much more transaction volume than Ethereum 1. So Ethereum layer 1. Actually, like earlier this year, the Ethereum has not been producing very well. So there are a lot of arguments in saying that the L2s are actually just gaining all the traction, just diverting all the attractions from Ethereum. So like the L2 is important to consider. Okay. Yeah, so and actually Vitalik also had this so-called roll-up-centric Ethereum roadmap. They're actually trying to make some changes to that. Like though this post was quite some time ago. If we see it's 2020, Ethereum at the time was thinking about L2 is going to be the core of the Ethereum ecosystem, but with the Ethereum price not doing so well in the beginning of the year, they are kind of rethinking about this idea. But just the point is roll-up, and especially optimistic roll-ups are playing an important role in the Ethereum ecosystem. So it's important for us to understand whether their design is indeed incentive compatible or not. And if they are not, like what is actually keeping them in shape. All right, so yeah, so I'm gonna skip these, like, because this here is the point I've just made before, is that the layer 1 blockchains, the proof of stake layer 1 blockchains actually also implicitly builds on this optimistic principle. So even if you don't care about Ethereum L2s, if you just, as long as you care about Ethereum L1, then you should care about whether optimistic designs are incentive compatible. And then cross-chain bridges also has the similar effect. So for the sake of time, I'm going to skip that. All right, so I'm going to jump into a very simple model, again, to illustrate the point and to clarify the point why it's not fully incentive compatible for these stake and slashing mechanism to deter bad behavior. So I'm going to develop a very simple game theoretical model. This is so simple, it's basically game theory 101 material. So I'm going to have a 2-player, 2-action simultaneous move game. The 2 players, the 2 players are, one is an attacker, and a second is a so-called a challenger. Right? So the attacker, basically, you can think about in the context of L2 or rollup, is the party who would like to bring the information on the L2 back onto the L1. And by calling them attacker, it means that it has the ability to choose either to truthfully transfer information from L2 to L1 or do it in an adversarial way, meaning like tampering certain information or censoring certain transactions. So the attacker has two choices, either attack the protocol or do not attack. When they do not attack, they just do things honestly. If they do attack, that means like all the bad behaviors I've been talking about. And there are there's also a challenger, although the challenger, just according to the description of Arbitrum just now, right? Those are the people who monitor the maintainer of the L2 systems, and they see, okay, they monitor them and they see whether they are actually attacking the system or not. And the challenger, they can also choose whether they actually monitor or they shirk on their monitoring behaviors, okay? So again, the interpretation for the attacking is erroneous recording transactions or violating consensus protocols, transmitting wrong messages, whatever you can think about. Just anything that deviates from what these operators should be doing. And the challenger in terms of the interpretation of monitoring is that while verifying whether all the L2 transactions, the L1 blocks are indeed validly executed, okay? Is there a question or?
Yeah.
Yes?
So the incentives to erroneously record is just because it's lower cost for them?
I'll give you the incentives now here. All right, so yeah, so because it's the two-player, two-action game, right? So we can just draw a payoff matrix. So to your question, is like, why do we want to, why does the attacker want to attack? So first of all, if the attacker chooses to attack the system, then it will enjoy certain private benefit. I call it pi that is larger than 0. What are these private benefits? So your question. So for example, like if there is a transaction on L2 in which says I pay you a certain amount of money, right? And then when I move this information back to the L1, maybe I have incentive to say, well, just remove that transaction so that the record of I paying you is never actually there. So then I can say, okay, I don't have to pay you. Right, so you can argue that this is certainly some private benefit that I can enjoy, right? So I mean, this is just one example, but all I need is that if I attack the system, I enjoy some private benefit, right? So this is a pi. If I attack, but if the challenger they catch me attacking the system, then I assume that there's going to be some penalty imposed on me, and I denote it as capital T. You can think about this as the slashing that actually goes on, right? And if I do not get caught, I'm not challenged, then I just enjoy the private benefit and don't lose anything else, okay? And we assume that for the challenger, there is some private cost to actually monitor, right? So if you monitor what the validators, the attacker are doing, you actually need to set up a node, you need to sync everything, and then you need to execute all the transactions and to see whether the transaction outcome is identical to whatever the attacker is claiming. Okay, so there is some private cost to monitor the system, so which is we denote as lowercase c. Okay, if I try to monitor the system and then I do find that the attacker is attacking, then I will get some reward, which I call the lowercase t. Okay, if I try to monitor but the attacker is not really attacking, then I'm not going to get rewarded because I'm not catching anything bad behavior. Right. So we can make the reward to the challenger to be less than the slashing amount, the penalty to the attacker, just to make sure the system is budget balanced. Okay. If there's any difference, we can just in the blockchain world, it's very easy to have this thing to be. I think it's hard. I should flip that t minus t. You can just burn them. Okay. So also it's important that we set the reward to be larger than the cost of monitoring to incentivize monitoring, because if this lowercase t is less than c, then nobody will monitor at all. okay? Because just you're not incentivized enough, right? So if we try to summarize this payoff matrix, what we can see is that for the attacker, it's profitable to attack the system if and only if you are not going to be caught. And for the challenger, it's profitable to monitor the system if and only if you catch an attack, okay? So now actually the model, hopefully you can see the model is simple enough. You can probably already see what is the incentive problem here, right? So to make analogy, just forget about all the blockchain stuff we're talking about. We're talking about, just like we're talking to 5-year kids, right? We're talking about a fairy tale between the police and the thief, okay? And the thief would like to steal if the police is not watching, okay? And the police would like to patrol if they can catch the thief so that they can get some reward. Now we can see there's no pure strategy Nash equilibrium for the system to be purely secure, right? If it's fully secure, then just means nobody is stealing. If nobody is stealing, the police says, why do I patrol? I spend all the cost patrolling, I'm not gonna catch any thief. I should not patrol. I should not patrol at all. And then for the thief to then say, okay, the police is not patrolling, why don't I steal? It's stupid not to steal. Okay, so that just basically means that the system just cannot be perfectly secure, as a lot of the community members have been advocating for those optimistic blockchain mechanisms, right? So this is like in contract theory, this is like a kind of monitoring game. So economists should be familiar with that. But I think this is an important message, right, to bring to the community. We need to understand that, okay, we cannot have a perfectly secure optimistic solution, design. Okay, so the rest is just some formality. The proposition is that there's no pure strategy Nash equilibrium. In any equilibrium, there's always going to be some attacks. And there's always going to be some attacks that just never get caught. That just has to be the equilibrium outcome. Okay? So then this is just what I'm saying. Mixed strategy Nash equilibrium, there's always going to be attack and attacks not being caught. Okay, so now, how much time do we have? 0? Okay, I'm gonna seek this model extensions and then maybe just get to the bottom line. Yeah, I think the economic message here is actually very simple. All I want to do is to bring awareness to the blockchain community is that these optimistic solutions is not fully incentive compatible. Okay, does not necessarily mean they don't necessarily work, right? So even though like with some parameters, the chance of those breakdowns may be small. So you can say, well, like any cryptography systems has negligible probability of failure. So maybe optimistic solutions, if they design well, maybe the probability of bad things happening will be small. But still, we cannot claim that they're fully incentive compatible. So I think there's a fine line that we need to distinguish. I think I'll stop here. Yeah, thank you.